Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the full length debut album from Caitlyn Smith called Starfire. So, this was an album I did not plan on covering at all. And I can imagine for those of you in the know going in before this record came out, a lot of my assumptions might seem kind of justified, but that's just it. They were assumptions, and from the critical buzz, they were probably the wrong ones. So okay, here's some background. Odds are you don't know who Caitlyn Smith is unless you've been reading through the liner notes of very specific albums or you heard one of her EPs. Now, if you knew her at all outside of country, it was for Like I'm Gonna Lose You, that big duet hit between John Legend and Meghan Trainor that came out a couple years back. But what caught my eye was writing credits for Wild Boy by Danielle Bradbury back in 2013. And while her career might have gone off the rails in spectacular fashion, Wild Boy was a really good song. And apparently Caitlyn Smith was a powerhouse vocalist on those EPs, some of which came onto this debut album, and then she signed to Monument Records. Now, if you recognize that imprint at all, it's probably for a ton of music that dropped in the 60s and 70s. But after some mismanagement, the imprint was sold and then rebuilt as a short-lived country label in the late 90s, early 2000s. Most recently, it has been revived by mainstream country mega producer Shane McAnally. And while I have said a lot of good things about him in the past, inflicting Sam Hunt upon us in recent years killed a lot of that goodwill, and signing Walker Hayes as the first artist to Monument killed pretty much the rest. And while I knew Starfire was never going to be as bad as Boom was for Walker Hayes, I had no reason to believe that Shane McAnally was going to push Caitlyn Smith in a good direction. And yet, apparently all the critics are going crazy over this album, so there must be something I'm missing here. So yeah, I figured I would check out Starfire. Was this the country debut I've been waiting for in 2018? Well, yes and no, but that's more because Caitlyn Smith's Starfire is a little bit tougher to contextualize than you would expect for your average mainstream pop-leaning country debut. Now, part of me is a little bit amazed this got a full major label debut budget, because while there are moments where this could slip in next to Carrie Underwood or Miranda Lambert, a lot more of it feels like it would fit in the tier of mainstream adjacent lyric-driven country acts who really should be dominant in the mainstream and yet are a shade too smart to get there. Think closer to Cam or Eric Posleg or Brandy Clark. And yet, even with all that, this is one of the more fully realized pop country debuts I've heard in a while, and a pretty damn great one to boot. You're gonna definitely want to check this out. I'm so happy I did. And a huge part of this is the sound and the production. And while it is easy for me to praise this record for what it isn't in comparison with what it is, I can't deny that there is something incredibly refreshing hearing this brand of pop country without drum machines or garish synthesizers or blatant autotune or anything beyond the thick, organic, groove-driven warmth that cultivates a lot of intimacy without feeling claustrophobic, with a lot of potent tone and some really great bass lines without overwhelming the audience, and a diversity in its melodic through line. Now, if you're going to go in expecting this to hew closer to the rough scrabble, more burnished tones of indie country nowadays, you're not really going to get that. With the infusion of more rich, tasteful strings and pianos on songs like East Side Restaurant or Cheap Date, it almost plays more to the old-fashioned pop tropes of the 1950s, or at least is trying to cultivate that same sort of classy vintage veneer. And you know what? I actually don't mind this at all. East Side Restaurant is absolutely gorgeous as a song, and there really isn't anybody in mainstream country or even mainstream pop right now that's playing for what Caitlyn Smith is going for, especially when you consider how other tracks are very much grounded in a more indie country leaning direction that's more songwriter focused. Look at the bare atmospherics of Don't Give Up on My Love that remind me a lot of Brandy Clark's last album, or how more detail focused and acoustic songs like This Town Is Killing Me and St. Paul and Scenes from a Corner Booth at Closing Time on a Tuesday and Cheap Date. Hell, a lot of this wouldn't be that far removed from the adult alternative scene 20 years ago, albeit with some of the edges sanded more back because, again, mainstream pop country. Now, I will say when this record pivots towards slightly more modern or upbeat tunes, it can stumble a bit for me. I like the jagged guitar work on the title track, or the waltz cadence on Before You Call Me Baby, or the looser stab at even country funk on Contact High, especially when they use more minor tones in the composition. But you know what? There are also songs you could probably give to Kelsey Ballerini, and they just don't have the same color for me. And on the flip side, when you have songs like Tacoma and House of Cards, they play for power ballad territory that might as well have been pulled straight from the easy listening in the mid-90s, and it's not always the most flattering territory for Caitlyn Smith, and more on this in a little bit. But you know what? When you do dig into that content, I really love the balance that she brings to the table between vintage power balladeer and that singer-songwriter side. And while I personally would prefer the latter style for her, this is more up my alley, she's plenty capable of nailing both consistently, especially when she leans into those details. Let's face it, East Side Restaurant and House of Cards and Do You Think About Me and the Garth Brooks cover Tacoma, they're not exactly complex in the breakup situations that are put forward there, but it's the little details that knock them into stronger territory, make good songs great songs, like how the feeling that her prayers just aren't being answered, or the lonely meal she's eating alone in East Nashville where she just bemusically toasts this guy. For songs that go big or go broad, those details help them stand out, and when she leans all the way into those details, we get some great pictures put to words. The reminiscence of her home in Minnesota and St. Paul with those great little British music lover details, or watching all the character interactions on scenes from a corner booth on closing time on a Tuesday and capturing that wistful loneliness, or the cute little hookup of Cheap Date. The lived-in details are what stands out to me. They feel so human and make these stories and pictures so much more interesting than the regurgitated checklists from bro country that I've heard hundreds of times before. And you know what? While I will admit I've got a personal weakness for these sorts of songs, This Town Is Killing Me is the follow-up to Charles Kelly's Leaving Nashville that I've been waiting for, and that song was my favorite track of 2016. Just as honest about the life of a singer-songwriter and independent musician in Music City, and showing how, despite how much she wants to leave and go home, she never really will. She's gonna keep chasing that dream. Now on the flip side, there are songs that feel a little more conventional that just don't grab my attention in the same way. Contact High, the title track, and even Don't Give Up on My Love, they're fine enough, but they don't stand out in the same way, and I will say the record doesn't exactly start with its most detailed tracks putting forward. And this takes me to the biggest issue in the album, Caitlyn Smith herself, specifically her voice. Now, let me get this straight. She is a powerhouse singer. She's got huge pipes, a lot of real charisma and emotive presence. She can play the subtlety when she wants to. This is a hell of a debut, but I'm also reminded a little bit of Jewel in the mid-90s. How there are points that can feel a little bit oversung, a little overdone, and while the right production behind her helps, it just doesn't get all the way there for me, especially in comparison with someone like Lindy Ortega, who sounds very similar and has slightly more refined poise. The larger issue, unfortunately, comes in enunciation and tone, because while I get she's supposed to sound a little bit slippery and unstable on Contact High, that huskiness in her voice across this entire album can get kind of distracting, and doesn't always help the details in her writing get the right emphasis. Now, I'm not sure if it's an issue just being a little pitchy or a tone that's a little bit more fit for campfire songs than power ballads in her voice, although she certainly has that raw power to go big. There's a lot of intensity in her voice I respect, but you know what? If you're gonna draw inspiration from the huge 90s power ballads with singers who also had huge vocals and very clear tone, it's more noticeable when it doesn't work. At least for me. But at the same time, this is her debut album. I can see some of those rougher patches getting figured out with future releases. There were songs that came from previous EPs that were brought on board here. And honestly, I hope we get those future releases because Starfire is really great. And I see this finding an audience and a lane too. In mainstream pop-leaning country, Caitlyn Smith strikes a great balance between old school class and a more refined focus on her songwriter detail that makes her material both memorable and really quite potent, to say nothing of being accessible. It'll probably play best to an older audience. It's a little bit too world-weary and refined for the teenage girl set, but to me, that's a huge part of its appeal, which is why it's getting an 8 out of 10 from me and definitely a recommendation. Folks, I damn near slept on this because of all my assumptions, and with every listen, I'm kicking myself for it. Definitely take the time, check this out. You won't regret it. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I know I got this a little bit late, but hey, it took its time to get up my schedule. That happens, and I am happy I covered it, because again, this is good stuff. You want to buy the record? Links in the description below, and I got the poll up there for all you Caitlyn Smith fans to tell me how wrong I am and how this is just a perfect record. And honestly, given how much of its appeal I can see why you'd do that. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you guys want to get involved in my scheduling process so I can talk about records like this earlier, link to my Patreon is right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, you guys get to add albums, movies, or even a top 10 list to that schedule. And if you want to see the schedule, link to my Instagram is down there below. That's where I post it whenever it gets updated. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.